Welcome back to those of you who came to our first panel, and welcome to those of you who are new. I'm Chris Paxson. I'm the 19th president of Brown, and I'm just honored to be here today. Thank you. So most of you have been thinking a lot about what Brown means over the past weekend. I know I've been thinking about it as we prepared for the 250th. And one thing that's very clear is that Brown is about equity, human dignity, social justice, principles that have informed the life of today's speaker, Thomas Perez of the class of 1983. In his current role as U.S. Secretary of Labor, Tom continues a long, distinguished career that encompasses service. He has been a tireless advocate for civil rights within the Department of Justice. He has been Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights under Janet Reno, a leading advisor to Senator Edward Kennedy on civil rights, justice, and constitutional issues, and is Director of the Office for Human Rights in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He is the son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. He worked as a garbage collector and in a warehouse to help pay his tuition at Brown. He concentrated in political science and international relations and went on to earn joint degrees from Harvard Law School and the JFK School of Government, becoming the first lawyer in his family. I think all of his siblings are physicians, is that right? So you're the oddball. Right. In 2010, the Brown Alumni Association honored him with the Will Rogers Award, which is presented to alumni who live up to the university charter's call to live lives of usefulness and reputation. And he will be talking a lot more about his experience in conversation with Rick Locke. So let me just say a few words about Rick. And instead of a formal address, we thought a conversation would be much better. Professor Richard Locke is the director of the Watson Institute for International Studies and a professor in political science. He has come to Brown, started in September, truly is reinvigorating the Watson Institute, working with our already distinguished faculty who are there. It's an area where I think Brown has great strength and an area where we can build even further. So Rick's work focuses on global supply chains and making sure that they work efficiently as well as equitably and fairly. And I couldn't think of a better person to have a conversation with our speaker. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here. And as President Paxson mentioned, we thought we would sort of organize this more as a conversation. So I'm going to sort of start off with a couple questions for Secretary Perez, maybe beginning from a more kind of personal perspective and then get into the issues. And then we wanted to open it up for more general question and answer. So thank you very much, Secretary Perez, for being here.
Tom's quicker.
Today.
We can get more questions in.
All right, so Tom, it's great to have you back on campus. And I thought it might be interesting for the audience just to hear a little bit about your personal story. So how does one go from being an undergraduate major in political science and international relations here at Brown to the U.S. Secretary of Labor? What was the path? What were the people or events that influenced that path?
Well, I have to say it starts with luck. It continues with great family support, mentors in the community here at Brown, and a lot of shoe leather, and some more luck. My folks came here to the United States from the Dominican Republic after my maternal grandfather was the ambassador to the U.S. until he spoke out after the massacre of the Haitians in the 30s and was declared non grata. I will note parenthetically that the state that has the most Dominican American elected officials in the United States is the state of Rhode Island. I will note that parenthetically, including your mayor. And so they came here. It was the middle of the Depression. They had, not a lot of money, but a lot of hope, and that stick-to-itiveness that comes from the immigrant experience, and a remarkable sense of appreciation for what this country gave to them in terms of opportunity. My dad was part of a student movement, so he kind of got kicked out too. And they came to the States, and they got married. My dad served as a legal immigrant in the U.S. Army, along with my mother's 4 siblings who served in the Army as legal immigrants. And legal immigrants have been serving in the U.S. Army since the Revolutionary War with distinction. And so they ultimately settled in Buffalo, in part because they felt that the weather was very similar to the Dominican Republic. And you know, there's actually, weather aside, there are a lot of similarities between the world of growing up in Buffalo and the world of growing up as a Dominican American, which is that Buffalo is a city of good neighbors. It's a city where people close ranks and take care of each other. It's a city that's you know, had some tough times, and you know, but they take care of each other. And the relevance of that for me was I was 12 when my dad died suddenly, and if you had told us January 1, 1974, that one of our parents was going to die, I was the youngest of 5. I think I continue to be the youngest of 5. You know, we would have all guessed my mother because she had some chronic illnesses. She had major surgery January of 74, and then after my dad died, she got sick again and was hospitalized. And so, you know, that was I've had better summers than the summer of 74, kind of like Richard Nixon, I guess. But, you know, what I learned from that was, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I had remarkable mentors in Buffalo. My best friend's dad was kind of my surrogate dad. He had a 9th or 10th grade education, but he was the wisest man I ever met, and taught me so much about life. I had older siblings who, you know, taught me how to throw a curveball, and literally and I guess metaphorically. And you know, it was being there was just remarkable. And then, you know, coming to Brown, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge someone who had a profound impact on my life, a guy named Ed Beiser, who some of you may know. And it was remarkable. A Catholic boy from Buffalo. His mentor is an Orthodox Jew from New York. And that's one of those remarkably at Brown moments. And what I learned here was, you know, again, to expand my comfort zone, embrace diversity, not simply tolerate. I hate the word tolerate. I mean, I tolerate Brussels sprouts, you know, and I teach my kids to tolerate Brussels sprouts. But, you know, Brown taught me how to embrace diversity and how to expand my comfort zone. And it really gave me, you know, the moral and ethical and intellectual foundation for so much of what I did. And, you know, I know that Brown talks about living a life of, I think, usefulness and reputation. And, you know, what my parents taught me was the ladder is always down. I think that's a same way of saying that to whom much is given, much is expected. And that's what they taught me. And I wanted to change the world. And I watched one of my brothers operate one day and realized that medicine wasn't for me after they picked me up off the ground. And so I went into law school and public policy school, and again, with an eye toward you know, making sure the ladder was down for others. And we struggled. You know, I talk about I relied on Pell grants and Perez grants. You know, I had older siblings who, you know, had graduated and they were in their residency, so they didn't have a lot of money, but, you know, a check would show up here and there from a brother saying, hey, you know, you're probably in need. So, you know, everybody's had someone who has helped them out. And I had a lot of folks who helped me out in my community, in my college, and throughout. And you know, my life professionally was all about expanding opportunity, because I always tell my students, the second last day of class when I used to teach, I used to have them do an assignment. And their assignment was to write their obituary. And I wanted them to do that because I think all too many students go through their lives, and all too many people go through their lives not knowing why they were put on the planet Earth. And so I wanted, and I always did it the second last class because I wanted to use it and reflect, and I never graded it. But, you know, maybe I should have. But it was really important because I feel lucky. You know, I feel like I've been able to answer that question. And I didn't have any idea that I was going to become the Secretary of Labor someday. But I didn't have any idea I would become Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. I had no idea I was going to run for office. But what I did have an idea of was that I wanted to make a difference. I thought that public service was the best way to make a difference. I love working in organizations where you have a lot of folks, because when you have 17,000 people at the Department of Labor, and if you can get them, everybody with their oar in the water rowing in synchronicity, that's a game changer, and you can really make a difference. And so that's really been, in short, the story of my life. And I learned from Brown to take risk. As I get older, you're supposed to get more risk averse, and I have gotten just the opposite, because I truly believe that there's no such thing as failure. There are only learning experiences. I once ran for Attorney General in Maryland. It wasn't successful, but it was the best learning experience of my life. And I wouldn't be here today had I been successful there. And so when a window closes, other doors emerge. My mother always taught me that. Never quite understood it, but I now live it. And that's why I feel very lucky, because in this job, we're in the middle of so much of the President's Opportunity Agenda. And so I just feel like Lou Gehrig.
Great. Thank you. That was really a terrific sharing of your story. Tell us what a typical day is like as Secretary of Labor. I mean, with so many different issues. I mean, wages and hours and standards and health and safety, et cetera. How do you kind of manage them all, especially not just having a complex portfolio of activities, but also in today's political climate, where Congress is not all that friendly to labor issues? How do you manage it? What's it like?
Well, as I said, we have roughly 17,000 employees, about $18 billion budget, and we have roughly 20 different agencies that are all about expanding opportunity in many different ways, whether it's retirement security, whether it's job safety, whether it's wage and hour, whether it's the international work that I have the privilege of doing with you. And the key for me, it starts with hiring the right people, because you can never run a complex organization if you don't have the right people. The road to success is always lined with good people, regardless of where you are. And so I took, and I always take, great pain and time to have the right team on board, because my philosophy of leadership is that you get the right folks. I call it the bus. You get the right people on the bus, you empower them, you communicate a vision. It's not a vision that is only informed by yourself, but it's informed by active listening. I think too many leaders don't listen. I know too many folks in Congress don't listen, and that's not meant to be a partisan observation. I've seen that malady across the ideological spectrum. And so that's where it starts, is you can't possibly get everything done if you don't have a good team. And then you've got to communicate a vision. And for us, I focus on 3 or 4 issues. And I look at my time management every 2 weeks and ask myself, are we driving those issues? For me, the issues are skills, making sure that people have the skills necessary to succeed as we come out of the Great Recession. We focus on issues of inequality, making sure that we reward hard work with a fair wage and that we ensure that workplaces are safe. We focus a lot on retirement security because we want to make sure that people can retire with that nest egg. We focus on being a credible deterrent, making sure that we use all our leverage points. And as to your question about, how do you do it in today's milieu, you understand your leverage points. We have laws that we enforce, and that's a huge leverage point, but we have regulations that we issue and enforce, and that's a huge leverage point. We have the power to convene, and that is a huge leverage point. The president talks about his pen, and he talks about his phone. President Watson participated in an event roughly 6 weeks ago where university presidents came in and talked about what they are going to do to make education more accessible for students. And it's a remarkable partnership, and I commend your leadership. And so we have that. We have the bully pulpit, and we do that. I was with two of the governors here. We were with the president earlier this week up in Connecticut talking about the minimum wage. Because you know what? If Congress isn't going to act, well, the president will issue an executive order, which he's done, on the minimum wage. And then we're working with states across the country and local governments across the country to do that. And so there are a lot of different leverage points. And the key to success is understanding them and using them to great advantage.
Great. Thank you. There's a lot of controversy around some of those issues that you're really pushing.
I've been told that.
Yeah, and let's just take one or two of them maybe to explore. So the issue of minimum wage, which you just brought up. So on the one hand, it's clear that promoting an increase in the minimum wage can help deal with the inequality issues that you mentioned. On the other hand, people are very concerned that in today's economy, it might actually drive away employment opportunities, kill jobs, especially in, say, low-wage service sectors. How do you respond?
Well, I respond by listening. And again, I underscore that. That's, I think, one of the most important things we have to do. And so I spend a lot of time with business owners. I was out in Seattle Monday of this week, and I met with the CEO of Costco. He has debunked the false choice that you either take care of your shareholders or take care of your workers. He showed me a slide. Over the last 20 years, the average return for investors in Costco stock was 17% a year. Yeah, I know. They call me Tom Buy High, Sell Low Perez. And then the next day, I was in San Francisco, and I met with the senior leadership of the Gap. They made a business decision to pay their workers the minimum wage. They think, what they said to me, which really resonated, was, we make investments in IT. We make other infrastructure investments. Our most important part of our infrastructure is our human capital. And this is an investment in our human capital that will pay off. And then, equally importantly, I talk to families who are struggling. And nobody in this country who works a full-time job should have to live in poverty. And when I think about when I was in Connecticut with the president this week, I was in New England 10 days ago, and I heard from people, and one person's telling me, I'm making choices between buying a gallon of milk or a gallon of gas. I'm making choices between my electric bill or getting medicine for my child. I met a person in New Jersey who works at the Newark airport loading baggage. The first raise he's gotten in 9 years was when the voters of New Jersey raised the minimum wage. There's no benefits. This kid turned 16 years old, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't get you a gift. I can't afford it. And so, when you listen and you see what's happening, and then you look at history. 100 years ago, Henry Ford did a radical thing. He doubled the wages of people on the assembly line. And why did he do that? He did it for a couple reasons. His attrition on the assembly line at that point was 360%. I have never met a business owner who can run a business when you are replacing your workers virtually every week. And then he said something else, which was, the folks who are working on my assembly line ought to be able to buy the products that they're making. And when you put money in their pocket, individual prosperity becomes community prosperity. Because what do? They spend it. And what happens then? Then businesses have to make more things. And then what happens? Then they have to hire more people. And so when I hear the issue of this is a job killer, I think of people like your former colleague, Alan Kruger. Because Alan studied this. Alan is the former head of the Council of Economic Advisors. He's a very esteemed economist at Princeton. And he did a very elegant study. Down at southern New Jersey, there was one jurisdiction that had raised the minimum wage and the other that had lower. And so they're right next to each other. And so they had this natural experiment. And they went and studied it. Did the jurisdiction that raised the minimum wage see the job loss that economic theory, and by the way, they call it theory because it often has no resemblance to reality. And Alan showed that through his studies. And then the question was, hey, that's just one jurisdiction. So another group of economists did it in something like 400 jurisdictions where you had the same experiment. And guess what they found? there was no impact on jobs. We've got too many people in this country that are struggling to make ends meet. For them, that basic bargain of if you work hard and play by the rules, you can put a roof under your head and feed your family, that ain't working for them. And when the president, FDR, signed the Fair Labor Standards Act 75 years ago, it was based on the value proposition that if you work a job, you should be paid a fair wage. And you see studies earlier this week, the Center for American Progress. We could reduce our food stamp program by $46 billion in the next 10 years if we would raise the minimum wage. Because I meet people every week who are working 50 hours and collecting food stamps because they can't make ends meet. So I tell my conservative friends, we want self-sufficiency in this country. We want to reward work. That's why we have an earned income tax credit. That's why we need to pay a fair wage. And by the way, it doesn't cost the taxpayer money when you raise the minimum wage. And so, I've thought about this issue a lot. I've listened to a lot of folks. I've studied the data. And it's remarkable when you look at the polling on this, because majority of small business owners support an increase in the minimum wage, because as the guy in Seattle told me this week, what I need most, Tom, are customers. The majority of Republicans support increasing the minimum wage. This is the right thing to do, and it's a smart thing to do. And I'm sorry I took so long, but I meet people day in and day out who tell me these stories that just keep me up at night.
Yeah.
And then I meet remarkable business owners who are trying to do this and are doing it and setting a remarkable example. And that's why we're going to keep fighting. And if it doesn't work in D.C., we're going to go to every state we can, and we're going to take it to referendum, and we're going to make sure we do this. Because this is the basic bargain with the middle class. Fair wages should reward you. Work should be rewarded. Work shouldn't have to. The most important family value we can give is the value of time. And if you're working 3 jobs, you can't help your kid with your homework. And I see that everywhere I go.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about working conditions and health and safety and other issues. Last week, President Paxson took a leadership decision to embrace the Accord for safety, trying to promote safe and healthy conditions in the factories in Bangladesh that make a variety of products that we purchase here in the United States. What can, and I think it was a very, very welcome decision on campus, what can the United States government do to try to promote fair and healthy working conditions, not just in the United States, but in the factories throughout the world that are producing the things that we buy every day?
Well, I think we start by acknowledging and rejecting false choices. I hear time and time again the talking point that we can either create jobs or have job safety. You can't do both. That's a false choice. Just like the false choice that you either take care of your shareholders or your workers. That's a false choice. And when I was with the Gap earlier this week, we had a conversation about these issues. And there's a domestic component to this conversation and question, and there's an international component. On the domestic level, if you get on the DOL website, you will see a conversation with Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was the first Secretary of Labor, the first female in the cabinet, the gold standard for every Secretary of Labor. And you will see Frances Perkins talking about the dangers of silica in 1936 or 1937. We knew decades ago that silica, exposure to silica, kills. And it is no different, in my judgment, than the conversation we've had about tobacco. A lot of junk science that says, well, no, maybe it doesn't, maybe we should study it more, and the conversation goes on. Well, we have a notice of proposed rulemaking. We have a proposed rule out there to finally regulate silica. And that's what, 70 years later. I think she's been deceased for a while. And yet, it's the conversation, another job-killing regulation. Well, I talk to employers who understand that their most important resource is their employees, and they need to keep them safe. And that, you know what, common sense regulation is totally consistent with a fair return on investment. Internationally, this is the same thing. We have an office, and I will note parenthetically, I'm very, very grateful to the gentleman to my right, because Rick is an internationally renowned expert in this area, and he came to our office a couple weeks ago, met with our team. We go around the world because we need to practice what we preach around the world. And I was in Honduras recently talking with business owners and labor leaders because there are all sorts of challenges if you want to organize. Organizers who are being killed, very unsafe conditions for people who are advocating for workers. Bangladesh is perhaps the most conspicuous example. You saw the unconscionable and preventable incidents. And so we're having these conversations, and there have been two different sets of stakeholders that have established an alliance and an accord, and they're both attempting to improve safety. My goal is to make sure that everybody, regardless of where you live on the planet Earth, when you go to work, you're going to come home from work, and you're going to come home safely. And when we lift up these standards, we can do so in a way that does not undermine the ability of businesses to make ends meet. And so that's why we're spending so much time on supply chain issues. And I think and I'll end where I started, it begins with rejecting false choices. Too many people are wedded to their talking points. And again, not meant to be a partisan comment. I see it on the left, I see it on the right. And if we could tear up our talking points and have a conversation that's motivated, first of all, by some values. And the basic value being, you ought to be able to go to work and understand that you're going to come home. You ought to be able to go to work and understand that, when you retire, you're actually going to watch your grandchildren grow up, because you're not going to get asbestosis. You're not going to get black lung. You're not going to get all the other afflictions that we see that are preventable. And so that's where we're continuing to go. It's a work in progress. And there are a lot of global pressures, but I think it's some of the most important work we do as a federal government.
Great. So let's open up the conversation to the audience. There are microphones on both sides of the room in the different aisles, and so if people could just sort of line up, and I'll just alternate microphones. And if you just introduce yourself briefly, and please, if you can keep the questions short so that we can have more time for discussion. And why don't we begin with you?
Thank you. My name is Jim Godwin. I'm not an alumni here, but a guest, and I appreciate you being here today. It's an informative speech. I have a question in regards to what seems like business opposition to the increase in the minimum wage. With your example with Costco and Ford and how it seems to benefit an organization long term, can you explain how it seems they're so opposed to that proposal?
You're asking the wrong guy. But no, I mean, it's what's interesting to me is I've looked across every business model, and you see the big box model. Costco has demonstrated it. You look at the burger model. Anyone here west of the Mississippi? Okay, next time you're out in California, go to In-N-Out Burger. They've got 650 franchises up and down the Northwest, over into Nevada and Arizona. I just ate there. I was in Sacramento with Governor Brown Tuesday, and on our way back to San Francisco, we stopped at In-N-Out Burger. And they've been paying a minimum wage. They've been paying, above the minimum wage since their inception. So they've demonstrated there. You look at small businesses. I go to Ace Hardware stores and talk to all sorts of folks. I talk to restaurateurs. I talked to a restaurateur in New York who has a bistro in Brooklyn. And they have been able to keep their dishwashers for a year and a half. They have 4 of them. And anyone who's in the restaurant business, if you keep a dishwasher for a year and a half, that's like 15 years in any other profession, because they pay above the minimum wage. And so, I think, again, we need to move beyond the economic theory and into the reality of what is happening. 70% of growth in GDP is consumption. This has been a relatively consumption-deprived recovery because people don't have enough money. And when you put that money in folks' pockets, and by the way, when you go up to 10-10, these folks aren't going to take that money and put it in some offshore account. That ain't gonna happen. They're gonna spend it. And by the way, they're gonna spend it locally. And so, we gotta continue to make that point. And that's, by the way, the reason why the majority of small business owners in the recent survey support it is because they understand it. They need customers. But, again, we're stuck on our talking points. Fortunately, the people are ahead of a number of the politicians. And you ignore the people at your peril.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Perez, my name's Dave Morris. I was class of '88, and I actually wrote you a letter last June where I made a couple of policy suggestions, which I suggested as
I remember the letter, Dave.
In any case, I'd like to highlight one of them that I think is the most important of the 6 that I made, which is the idea of limiting the doctrine of at-will employment, limiting it such that people can only lose their jobs for what's called just cause. And this is actually the law in the state of Montana, which is not exactly the bluest of the blue states. It was proposed to be on the ballot in the state of Colorado, again, not the bluest of the purple states. But basically what it includes is that
If you can keep it short, please.
Oh, sorry. Well, very quickly, you can lose your job because you're bad at your job, incompetent, substandard performance. You can also lose your job because you do something bad, a crime of moral turpitude. Right. You can also lose your job because the employer is facing bankruptcy or adverse economic conditions. But what it limits is that you can no longer lose your job simply because the employer feels like it. And this happened to me once. I was laid off, and I actually was denied admission to the Kellogg School of Management because of that layoff. I spoke to the Kellogg admission officers, and I know that. In any case, it is the law in one state. It's not the law in the other 49.
And so the question is?
Would you support doing that at the federal level?
Okay, thank you.
Well, I mean, I think the question gets at a host of issues around the changing nature of the employment relationship and things that have been happening as a result of the recession. One thing that a number of businesses have done is they cut corners. And one corner they'll cut is they will misclassify somebody who's actually an employee as an independent contractor. That way you don't have to pay workers' comp, you don't have to pay health insurance. It's a huge problem. People call it misclassification. We actually passed a law in Maryland. I call it what it was. It was workplace fraud because you're cheating. The challenge that we have in regard to the question that you ask is that we have a system of federalism. And so, different states have the capacity to establish different sets of employment relationships. Some states are at-will states. Whenever someone calls me, like a friend periodically will call and say, I got fired from my job, what do I do? First thing I want to know is, what state are you in? That's an at-will state. You're screwed. Unless they fired you because of an illegal reason, like the color of your skin or something like that. But the honest reality is that this is an issue that's going to have to get resolved state by state, and it's one of a series of issues about the nature of work and the nature of employer-employee relationships that really need to be addressed in this country, because it's getting harder and harder for workers to have a voice and to respond in circumstances such as the one you described.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, so this is a bit more of a personal question.
If you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, sorry,
please.
I'm Zach Ingberg, class of 2015. How does your background as an attorney with the Justice Department and civil rights and maybe constitutional issues inform your work more so maybe than coming from a background of an economist? Or what kind of lessons did you learn in the Justice Department that kind of inform your work at Labor?
I guess I would answer your question slightly more expansively than what you asked. We're all a function of our life experiences. And what informs how I address things as much as anything has been life experiences, watching my surrogate father get laid off and struggle to find a job and have to pump gas at a gas station, listen and learn from people in similar straits. Everything I have done professionally, though, was built on the foundation of learning how to try a case. I was a trial lawyer for the better part of 10 years doing civil rights cases, hate crimes cases, police misconduct cases. And in that setting, you learn to take a complex set of facts, distill them into a simple recitation that you can persuade a jury to move on. And frankly, working for Senator Kennedy, you're doing the same thing, except you're doing it in a legislative context, running for local office or state office. The theory of the case is elect me or vote for me, and if you do that, here's what I stand for. And so, and a lot of it is building partnerships and building alliances and things of that nature. And so that foundation of learning how to try a case and taking complex fact patterns is a foundation that has really helped me in everything I've done. But again, it's necessary but not sufficient. It's the moral foundation of life experiences that inform what I try to do as much as anything.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mary Vassalero, class of 74 and parent 07. A couple of weeks ago, Time Magazine had a cover story on the 6-year high school and talked about programs where kids come out with guaranteed jobs. In that, there was a quote from the Bureau of Labor Statistics saying that middle-income jobs were actually projected to grow in this decade. I wonder if you could comment on education and how what you're doing,
Sure. I love your question, and it relates to one of the most important things we're working on, which is to make sure that people have the skills to succeed. The good news is that my life is Groundhog Day, and we pay tribute to him. I think he just died. And I'll have to talk about Caddyshack soon, too. But my life is Groundhog Day in the sense that I have the following conversation everywhere I go. Had it in Seattle last week, had it in Syracuse the week before. I have it everywhere. Business owners who tell me, I'm bullish about the future of this country. I'm bullish about manufacturing in this country because there are global forces at work. We have competitive energy costs here. Wages are going up in China, supply chain integrity issues in China, IP issues, and a great human capital workforce here and better laws here. And so businesses want to grow. And we've had 48 consecutive months of private sector job growth to the tune of 8.7 million jobs. And what I hear from every employer I talk to is my biggest challenge is I need to make sure that people have the skills to compete for these jobs, because 60 to 70% of the jobs we expect to be created are middle-skilled jobs. They require more than a high school degree, but less than a college degree. That's the segue to the question. What you were referring to is we are involved in a dramatic re-engineering of how we deliver education. And part of it is making sure that people have access to schools. There's a school in Brooklyn that the president visited called PTech. It's a 6-year high school experience. I've been to one, Sarah Good Academy, any of you in Chicago. There are 4 such schools. They're sponsored by businesses. IBM has developed the model. And by the way, it's open source. It's totally scalable. And what happens is, after 4 years, and Sarah Good, for instance, in Chicago is STEM focused. And so you can leave there after 4 years with your high school degree and go to a 4-year institution. Or you can go through and at the end of 6 years, you have your associate's degree and you have a guaranteed interview at IBM or whoever the sponsor is. And I've been to these schools. And by the way, they don't cream. So 90% plus of the kids here are living in poverty. They're not just trying to, get the so-called gifted and talented. I think everybody's gifted and talented. And programs like this are drawing out those gifts and talents. And it's remarkable to sit there and talk to a kid who is being exposed to something totally new. And what do you want to do? I always ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they're telling me in the heart of Chicago, some of the toughest neighborhoods, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a scientist. One kid said, I want to be a lawyer. I took him aside, tried to talk him out of it. But, it's remarkable. So we need to redesign how we deliver education. And that's where places like Brown can play such a big role in that redesign. And we need corporate engagement. And we're getting it. IBM, Motorola, others. Any of you here can go back to your communities and do this. There's a thirst for this. We need more people in the technical trades. We're doing a lot of work in career and technical education because there's a bright future in this country for people who want to work with their hands. And the biggest barrier we find are parents. You know, you tell someone, you know, my kid's going to be an electrician. Well, I was just in San Francisco Tuesday with the IBEW apprenticeship program. And I had this guy who said, I got the golden ticket. Remember Willy Wonka? I got the golden ticket because he's a journeyman. He's making 90 grand a year. And so, you know, we need to rethink, you know, how we're delivering education, understanding that, you know, we have to understand that you know, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but we've got to match this with what the demand needs are. So go visit P-Tech if you're in Brooklyn. Go to Sarah Good Academy if you're in Chicago. Help take these models to your community because they're totally scalable. And philanthropy is engaged, higher ed is engaged. It's good stuff. It's about building the middle class. It's about expanding opportunity. It is right in the sweet spot of what I'm doing, what Arnie Duncan's doing, and what the president's doing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, and thank you so much for coming back to Brown. My
to
name
see
is
you,
Donna
Senator.
Nesselbush, and I'm a 1984 proud graduate of Brown University. And I'm also a state senator from Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And we chatted for a moment before you began your remarks that we share coming from Buffalo, New York. And Pawtucket, Rhode Island is very similar to Buffalo, New York in that it's a working class community. As a state senator, I have become increasingly concerned about what we're hearing so much more about, income inequality. The 1% having so much of our nation and, of course, our state's wealth.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, as a state senator, if you have advice. You know, obviously government sets the rules of our economy, nationally and here in the state. If you had some advice as to what would be the biggest game changers or rule changers that a state could do to counteract income inequality and do something to help us grow the middle class, starting here in the state of Rhode Island, what regulatory, you know, or statutory changes would you feel are the most important to begin to counteract income inequality?
Well, there is no one magic bullet, but you know, the
You
opportunity
can give
quilt.
top 5.
Yeah, I'll give you 5, okay?
My assistant is hopefully taking notes.
Yeah, the opportunity quilt is clearly fraying, and you know, people who are in the middle class are concerned that they're going to stay, whether they're going to stay there, and whether their children are going to be able to get there. And people who are climbing the ladder are finding that the rungs are further between. And you know, state and local governments, and I served in local government, and I served in state government, because I could never hold a job. And so, you know, I appreciate that you can do so much. And obviously, we've talked about the minimum wage. You know, there's short-term things, and then there's long-term things. You know, investing in, you know, pre-K. You know, the data is overwhelming. You know, if you grow up in a low-income family, you know, I think the study was that you're going to be exposed to 3 million less words by the time you're 3 years old. You know, you're starting out behind when you go to kindergarten. When if you're not at grade level by 3rd grade, you know, the chances of graduating are so much less. There's so many people dropping out of school effectively by the 6th grade. And so your investments in education are so critical. Building partnerships between your community college system, your higher ed, your 4-year college system, and the business community are critical. The state of Rhode Island, you know, has the highest unemployment rate in the country. And, you know, making sure that there is a plan, what sectors are the growth sectors, and then align your educational partners with your business partners and your nonprofit partners. And by the way, continue to innovate on areas where people are really struggling, like, you know, paid leave, things of that nature. The governor of Connecticut, Dan Malloy, passed a law to allow for paid leave. The United States, Lesotho, and Burma, I believe, are the only 3 countries in the world that don't have some form of, you know, paid leave system at a federal level, at a national level. That's not good company, if you haven't figured that out. And so those are some things that you can do. So folks are doing it at a local level and at a state level, and you know, and I encourage you to, you know, to continue to innovate, and then we'll steal it if it's good.
Thank you.
Good morning, Tom. My name's Jeff Senior. I'm class of 1981. Puts me a couple years older than you, but not necessarily any wiser.
I'm quite confident that.
You mentioned that there has been job creation, and you mentioned the president's economic opportunity agenda. But we simply have insufficient economic growth in this country to increase employment to the levels that we all want. So it doesn't seem that we're using all of the tools in the toolbox. And I mentioned just a couple briefly. We could overhaul the personal tax code, reduce loopholes, reduce rates. Many of the loopholes benefit the wealthy. Everyone would benefit from reduced rates. We can overhaul the corporate tax code. We have the highest corporate tax code in the world. We can reduce loopholes again, reduce rates. We can aggressively increase domestic energy production. This would include the Keystone Pipeline.
And the question?
The question is, and finally, the International Trade Agreement, which is actually being blocked by Senator Reid. All of these things can increase economic growth, increase employment. They would all have Republican support. We just finished a seminar on polarization. So my question is, why doesn't the president include these items that reach across the aisle in his initiatives to increase growth and employment?
Thank you for your question, and the answer is he has. He has a proposal to reduce corporate taxes, and you can take, there's one-time savings that come from that you can take and then invest in infrastructure projects. He is working very hard on the trade issues, and again, takes two to tango there. There's a host of challenges there. Let me talk about a few other things that would pick up the pace of recovery, because the economy is moving in the right direction, but it's not moving fast enough. And the president would be the first to say that were he here. When you invest in infrastructure projects, roads and bridges, you address serious need. We've got bridges that are so old, if they were people, they'd be on Medicare. I mean, that's the truth. When you pass immigration reform, you grow the economy. I mean, there's legions of studies demonstrating that you not only grow the economy, you strengthen the Social Security Trust Fund, you reduce the deficit. Immigration reform was historically bipartisan, and so the president has put a host of things on the table that historically have enjoyed infrastructure. Dwight Eisenhower brought us the interstate highway system, and I talk to business owners all the time who talk about the infrastructure problem as a huge impediment to their growth because they're shipping things and it's taken too long. And so, we're going to continue to try to put these things on the table and have put these things on the table. And, regrettably, we are where we are, and it's unfortunate. It's getting, I frankly feel like, if the president put forth the notion that, oxygen was good for America, I think there are some who would introduce a bill to ban oxygen. That's where we're at, and it's unfortunate. And, we're working as hard as we can. That's, we've had a number, it pains me because the formula for further growth is not rocket science. You've outlined some things, I've outlined some things. And historically, we've been able to do this. 1996, presidential election year. Following the shutdown, they said you can't do a thing. Well, what happened that year? Immigration reform, welfare reform, minimum wage went up, hate crimes bill, HIPAA, which is health insurance privacy, all in a presidential election year. People need to continue to speak up and say, there's way too much important stuff going on. You got to put this other stuff aside and look at what's best for America. We're trying, and if you have any other ideas, I'm all ears.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Carmen Rodriguez, a member of the class of 1983. So we're classmates
Good to see you
together.
again.
Nice to see you too. And David Cicilline is here today, so we have some great representation. I'm honored to thank you for all of your service and leadership throughout your career, both as an alumna and as a Hispanic alumna. And I wanted to thank you for supporting Brown and for everything you've done for our alma mater. And I was wondering if you could speak to our students and to our alumni as to why you support Brown. And personally, I support Brown because I came to Brown on a scholarship, and I feel an obligation to pay it forward. I also support Brown's men's soccer because I believe in how Brown incorporates both the body and the mind. And finally, I support Brown because of all of the groundbreaking research that it does. And I'm hoping you can share your reasons for supporting Brown so that you can inspire all alumni, and especially our students, to support Brown.
Well, I support Brown because it changed my life, and it enabled me to do what I do. I was the diversity in my neighborhood growing up. Diversity was, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and I loved where I grew up. It was like Leave It to Beaverland, and it was safe. And people, we had some struggles, and people were with us, and so I wouldn't trade it for the world. But I also realized that I needed to, there was a bigger world out there, and Brown showed that to me. I remember a semiotics class with Professor Tannenbaum. And you had to give a presentation about something. And a woman gave a presentation about what it was like to be gay. And I still remember it, and it was part of what happens when you go to a school where you have folks from all over the world and all different perspectives. And I stayed here one summer and worked cleaning the dorms with some friends and had some fun here. And the guy I hung out with the most was a guy from Ghana, and sitting there and listening to him talk about his life's journey, and it was just so different from mine, and so my comfort zone got so far expanded, and my willingness to take risk in my professional life is a function of the intellectual foundation, I believe, that I got here. And again, as I said at the outset, getting that, it's important that you give back. And that's what I try to do. And that's what I hope students will do here, is take advantage of the opportunities that arise here. Make sure you're talking to folks that you disagree with. I'm confident I've said things today that folks agree with, and I'm equally, if not more confident, that I've said things today that folks don't agree with. That's not the point. Get out there and expand your horizons, and that will serve you well in the world, because everything we do at the Department of Labor, everything we do in the administration, and everything you're going to do in the business world just about is you're going to be working with other people. And the reason why when these affirmative action cases came to the Supreme Court, Grutter and then more recently Fisher, they had some of the most robust amicus participation. The Grutter case in 2004, there had never been more amicus briefs filed. Wow. Never before that case. It's been surpassed since. But the reason, and by the way, the majority of them were filed by Fortune 500 companies, because they understand if you want to compete in a global economy, you've got to be culturally competent, you've got to be linguistically competent, you've got to be able to thrive, not just tolerate this, but embrace it and work within it. And that's really what Brown did for me, and I am eternally grateful.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, a parent of 06 and 14. Given the recent vote at the Volkswagen assembly plant in Tennessee for workers not to participate with the United Auto Workers, I'm curious about your views of big labor today, and if it's failing, what does big labor of tomorrow look like, and what does it do?
Well, I followed that and had many conversations during that, and I was very disappointed by it because I've met with the leadership of VW, and what was ironic about that was ordinarily what we have, when I have heard people across the ideological spectrum say we should respect what employers are interested in doing, and the employer in that case wanted a works council. Germany has a remarkable business model that has been proven successful. And by the way, this business model is across their global footprint. This business model of co-determination is across their global footprint, except in China and except in the United States. So we're hanging with China on this one. And it broke my heart. But it does not break my spirit, because across this country, I have seen so many remarkable examples of union management partnership. I went to the Ford plant in Louisville, Kentucky a couple months ago, and they make the car that I drive, the Ford Escape. And 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, in the height of the recession, they were down to 700 employees. Today, they're 4,400 strong and growing, and that doesn't include their supply chain. How did that happen? That's because the union and the leadership got together and said, you know what, we got a problem, Houston, and we need shared sacrifice now to bring us shared prosperity tomorrow. And by the way, the president helped a little bit, despite the protestations of some, and he took a bet on them, and that was always the right bet. And I see examples of this all over the country. You know, you go to Las Vegas and you see partnerships between the largest employers there and the hospitality industry. They have ladders of opportunity. You can make $16 an hour working in the hospitality business in Las Vegas, plus benefits. And you look at the BLS data. If you are in a union, you're making $200 more. The median income is $200 more a week than if you're in a non-union shop. And so, you know, what we're doing, and we're sitting, I have a lot of conversations with business owners and labor alike to address this, because, you know, I believe that America thrives when people are working together. And I think that part of the challenge that we see here in the opportunity quilt is a function of the fraying in the collective bargaining context. And I don't think it's conjecture. You look at the data, and you look at density, and you look at, you know, the strength of the middle class, and there was, I wouldn't call it correlation, I would call it a causal link. And so you've put your finger on a real part of the unfinished business to strengthen the opportunity quilt.
Great, thanks. And this will be our last question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My name is John Lozada, and I'm the proud parent of a Brown Jr., Gabriel Lozada. I'm also a graduate of the George Washington Carver projects in East Harlem, New York, Amherst College, and University of California, Hastings. I've been a government attorney and now a government manager for many years. My question takes you back to the point of leadership that you were referencing at the beginning, where I've seen, it's wonderful that you have that vision of organizing that leadership team. When you get to the middle manager levels, somebody like me educates people on what it is not to discriminate, certainly. But we don't educate people on what it is to evaluate employees, counsel employees, work employees out. So that the selflessness of managers, the selflessness of leadership, we don't teach that, and we don't have that structured into the formulas that we create for evaluating our managers in government. And I think sometimes that's endemic to waste. Massive waste across government. When administrations change, those issues never get addressed. I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on how do we expand the leadership model to go beyond the top, to get into the middle, and to kind of teach ourselves to do a better job with working, leading employees.
Well, I spend a lot of time on this issue because one of my areas of focus, when I look back every 2 weeks, I talked about our external priorities, but one of my equally high priorities is to make sure that the Department of Labor is firing on all cylinders and that everybody gets up every day with a hop in their step. And we have some challenges in that regard. You look at surveys of satisfaction, job satisfaction, and we're not where we need to be. And part of my hypothesis, it's slightly broader than what you indicated. And by that I mean, I think the most important question that has to be asked with regularity in every organization that's going to work effectively is, what do you think? I'm not at all embarrassed to tell you that I've seldom had an original idea in my life. I'm not kidding. I mean, but I pride myself in being an active listener. And I am now in year 17 or something like that of federal service, the majority of which I served as a career person. And that informs me, and I think that makes me unique among my cabinet colleagues. And that very much informs my judgment, because I've seen political leadership come and go. And I started under Bush 1, so I've seen it Republican and Democrat. And I've seen good leaders and bad leaders among both. And I've seen all too frequently people who come in thinking that they know it all. And so I spend a lot of time on these issues. And I got an email last night from one of my senior leaders because I'm giving a speech on Monday on apprenticeship. And I emailed our career person who does apprenticeship to say, what's the most important thing I can tell this group? And his boss emailed me back to say, he's been here 30 years, he's never gotten an email directly from the secretary, he doesn't know what to do.
Exactly.
And, you know, again, he knows a hell of a lot more than I do. And so I'd be a fool to go in without the benefit of his insight. And that's the culture we're trying to, you know, put forth and foster. And culture change takes time. And I'm a big believer that the most important people in any organization are the head of the organization and then the first line supervision. Because I can trace every case of police misconduct that I prosecuted to failures of frontline supervision. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about this. And really it's simple. It's listening. It's empowering. It's, you know, we'll make mistakes, but let's learn from them. And let's, you know, go to school on them. And there's a bit of a risk averseness sometimes in our government agencies that we're trying to deal with.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. This has been an